Dr. Malian, step away from the computer and keep your hands where I can see them.
I already gave you the records. Why are you back
Because the
here?
records you gave us don't match the billing.
This is Violetta Malian, a Glendale physician who billed Medicare $24 million for Botox injections she never gave. Federal agents have been watching her for years, and she has no idea what she handed them.
In Cabo, Maui, Las Vegas, those claims were filed while you weren't even in the clinic.
Those were entered later. That doesn't mean the treatment didn't happen.
It does when the clinic was closed and one...
She had handed the agents the consent forms herself, neatly stacked, notarized, signed by dozens of patients over what was supposed to be a 6-year period. Every single one of them had been fabricated in her home office over the previous 72 hours. Federal data analysts had already run her Medicare billing against every provider in the country and found her sitting alone at the top of a chart no honest physician would ever appear on. $24 million in Botox reimbursements over 4 years. 6 times the next highest cluster of providers in America, all of them board-certified neurologists at major teaching hospitals. She was a solo cosmetic clinic operating out of a Glendale strip mall, and her passport showed her sitting on beaches in Cabo and Maui on the exact days she claimed to be personally injecting patients back in California. Serious question. How does a solo doctor in a Glendale strip mall collect more Medicare money for one single procedure than every neurologist at every teaching hospital in the country combined? Drop your theory in the comments before we get to the answer, and if you're not subscribed yet, hit the button right now. We break down how these schemes actually work every single week on this channel, and the numbers on this one are somehow going to get worse before we're done. Violetta Malian was born in Yerevan, Armenia in 1980. 3 years before her family joined the wave of Armenian emigration that would eventually reshape Los Angeles County. Her father had worked as an engineer at the Yerevan Physics Institute. Her mother had taught secondary school mathematics on Mashtots Avenue. Neither credential translated cleanly across the Atlantic. By the summer of 1985, the family had settled into a rented duplex in East Hollywood, and both parents were working night shifts. Her father delivered wholesale bread across the San Fernando Valley in a refrigerated van. Her mother took a piecework job at a garment factory near Alameda Street, sewing labels into t-shirts for $1.40 per 100 pieces. Violetta grew up along the corridor that would become the Armenian heart of Glendale, the stretch of Central Avenue and Brand Boulevard, where church signs were painted in Armenian script, and the bakeries sold lavash and choreg from behind plexiglass cases. She attended Herbert Hoover High School, graduating in 1998. Her guidance counselor's file described her as, quote, highly focused, competitive, difficult to redirect once committed to a goal. Her senior yearbook photo shows a serious young woman with dark straight hair pulled back tight, wearing a black turtleneck. Under her name, a single line, future doctor. She enrolled at UCLA in the fall of 1998 as a biology major on a partial scholarship. She lived at home for the first 2 years to save money and commuted to Westwood in a 1991 Toyota Corolla her uncle had sold her for $800. Her transcript from those years shows a pattern that would repeat throughout her career. Perfect scores in the classes that mattered. Average performance in everything else. Organic chemistry, A. Cell biology, A. American history, C+. Comparative literature, she withdrew. Medical school admissions were not kind to her. She applied to 23 American programs in 2003 and was rejected by all but 2 waitlist positions that never converted. She was accepted to Universidad Autónoma de Guadalajara in Mexico, one of the international programs that funneled American students back into United States residencies. She graduated with an MD in 2007, completed a 5th pathway program in New York, and passed her United States medical licensing examination on the 2nd attempt. Her California medical license was issued on March 11, 2011. She was 31 years old, and she had spent a decade getting to a starting line that most of her UCLA classmates had crossed at 24. The years between her licensure and her first clinic ownership were quiet ones. She worked as a physician contractor at 3 different urgent care groups across the San Fernando Valley, earning between $170,000 and $200,000 a year, depending on hours. Her tax returns from that period show a woman living carefully. A leased Honda Accord, a shared condo in North Hollywood, modest travel. Her one apparent luxury was skincare and cosmetic training. She completed short courses in Botox administration, dermal filler technique, laser resurfacing, and platelet-rich plasma injection. She was building, deliberately, the credential set required to operate a medical spa without a partner. She married a real estate agent named Aram in 2015. They did not have children. Colleagues described her in those years as reserved, precise, and unwilling to discuss her personal life at work. But she paid attention to what her better-paid patients spent their money on, and she took notes. Healthy Way Medical Center opened its doors in October of 2013 in a strip mall on North Verdugo Road in Glendale, sandwiched between a UPS store and a dry cleaner. The clinic occupied roughly 1,800 square feet on the second floor. 3 treatment rooms, a small waiting area with faux leather chairs, a front desk staffed by a single medical assistant who also handled billing. The signage advertised what most Glendale medical spas advertised in that era: Botox, fillers, laser hair removal, weight loss consultations, IV vitamin drips, cash pay cosmetic work. That was the business model on the sign. But the business model was about to bend because of a very narrow line in the Medicare payment schedule that most cosmetic doctors ignored entirely. Medicare, the federal insurance program for Americans 65 and older, does not pay for cosmetic Botox. It does not pay for wrinkle reduction. It does not pay for lip enhancement or forehead smoothing. It pays for exactly one thing when it comes to onabotulinum toxin A injections: the treatment of chronic migraine headaches in patients who have documented 15 or more headache days per month over a period of 3 months, at least 8 of which are diagnosed as migraine. That is a very specific clinical population. It requires a workup. It requires neurological documentation. It requires evidence that other preventive medications have failed. And when it is done correctly, it involves 31 separate injections across 7 muscle sites in the head and neck, administered by a physician trained in the specific preempt protocol. Neurologists perform the majority of these procedures nationally. A busy migraine specialist at a major hospital might bill Medicare for 400 to 600 of these treatments per year. The reimbursement rate, including the drug cost, averages around $1,200 per session. The system had one significant vulnerability. It relied almost entirely on the honor system for documentation. A physician who claimed to have injected a Medicare beneficiary for chronic migraine did not need to submit contemporaneous video, or a witness statement, or a co-signature from another clinician. The physician submitted a claim through a clearinghouse, attesting under federal law that the service had been provided as described. Medicare paid within 14 days. The claim sat in a database. And unless something specific triggered an audit, the money moved and no one looked at it again. There were fraud detection systems in place. There had been for years. But most of them had been built to catch small-time schemes. The systems flagged unusual patient counts, unusual billing frequencies, unusual dollar amounts against tight thresholds. What they did not do well, at least until 2023, was flag providers who submitted plausible-looking claims at implausible volumes over long periods of time. That gap was where Violetta Maillan built her empire. The first migraine Botox claim from Healthy Way Medical Center was submitted to Medicare on April 22, 2019. It was for a patient identified in the case file as VK, a 71-year-old Glendale resident who had come in the previous week for a cosmetic filler consultation. The claim charged Medicare for 31 migraine injections at $1,140. Payment cleared in 11 days. There is no evidence VK ever received a migraine injection. There is no evidence VK had chronic migraine. Her actual complaint, documented in her cash pay consultation notes on file at the clinic, was crow's feet around her eyes. She had paid $400 for a cosmetic Botox treatment during her visit. The migraine claim was submitted afterward, without her knowledge, using her Medicare number, which she had provided at intake because the front desk asked every patient for it. That was the template. Cosmetic patient walks in, pays cash for a forehead treatment, provides Medicare information on the intake form as a matter of routine, leaves. And a second claim, invisible to the patient, is submitted to the federal government for a treatment they never received, at a diagnosis they did not have, using injection counts and muscle sites that would have taken 45 minutes to administer if they had ever happened at all. Within 6 months, the volume had begun to escalate. By late 2019, Healthy Way was submitting between 40 and 60 migraine Botox claims per week. By 2021, it was over 100. By 2023, the clinic was submitting migraine Botox claims at a rate that exceeded the entire annual output of most academic neurology departments in California. The Medicare reimbursements flowing into the clinic's business account crossed $4 million in 2020, $6 million in 2021, nearly $8 million in 2022. By the end of 2023, the total had passed $22 million. The mechanics of the fraud required scale that the clinic could not physically produce. There were only 3 treatment rooms. There was only 1 licensed physician. And there was only 1 workable number of hours in a day. Investigators would later calculate that in order to have actually performed the injection she billed for during peak months, Maillan would have needed to be treating a chronic migraine patient every 11 minutes, for 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, with no lunch and no bathroom breaks. She was not doing that. What she was doing was traveling. Her passport stamps, later subpoenaed and cross-referenced with her billing calendar, told the entire story. Between January of 2021 and December of 2024, Maillan spent 143 days outside the United States, Cabo San Lucas, repeatedly, Puerto Vallarta, Punta Cana. She flew to Maui in June of 2022 for 11 days. She spent 17 days in Italy in the fall of 2023. She was in Las Vegas for the Bellagio Fountains, Aspen for skiing, and the Poconos for a 3-day resort weekend the same week her clinic billed Medicare for 162 migraine treatments. On days her clinic was documented as closed, Sundays, federal holidays, days when the electricity billing showed the office was empty and the security system logs recorded 0 entries. On those days, Medicare received more than $19 million in claims for injections she was supposedly personally providing. The money moved through the business account and then out. 2 Tesla vehicles were purchased in 2022 and 2023, a Model X and a Cybertruck, both paid in cash. 4 properties were acquired between 2020 and 2024. A hillside home in La Cañada Flintridge with a view of the San Gabriel foothills, an investment condo in West Hollywood, a rental duplex in Burbank, a vacation property in Palm Desert. More than $7.3 million accumulated across 3 brokerage accounts under her name and her husband's name. And in one of the more peculiar purchases the FBI would later document, she acquired a $12,000 antique medieval crossbow from an auction house in Belgium in the winter of 2023, shipping it home to California in a wooden crate labeled as, quote, decorative reproduction. The catalyst was not a whistleblower. It was not a patient complaint. It was not a former employee walking into an FBI field office with a grievance. It was not an accidental encounter with an undercover agent at a medical conference. It was a spreadsheet. In early 2024, the Department of Justice's Healthcare Fraud Unit had begun rolling out a new analytical layer on top of the existing Medicare billing database. The system, developed jointly with the HHS Office of Inspector General's Data Science team, was designed to flag providers whose billing patterns fell outside statistical norms, not just by frequency, but by ratio. Provider outputs compared against the median for their specialty, their region, and their peer group of similarly credentialed physicians. It was designed to find people who looked normal at a small scale and absurd at a large one. When the analysts ran onabotulinum toxin A for chronic migraine through the new filter in March of 2024, the results produced a chart that made the conference room go quiet. At the top of the chart, alone, well above every other provider in the United States, was a single physician operating a medical spa in Glendale, California. Her name was Violeta Maillan. Her total Medicare Botox reimbursements over the preceding 4 years were 6 times higher than the next cluster of providers on the chart. Every provider in that next cluster was a board-certified neurologist affiliated with an academic medical center. She was not a neurologist. She had no headache subspecialty training. Her clinic did not appear anywhere in the referral networks that legitimate migraine patients moved through. That single data point moved to the FBI's Los Angeles field office within a week. A joint task force with HHS OIG's Office of Investigations was assigned. The initial subpoena pool requested Medicare claim submissions, patient intake records, physician calendars, corporate bank records, and travel records for the preceding 60 months. It was a very large pool. What the analysts found, as they cross-referenced billing dates against every other data source they could subpoena, was a case that essentially built itself. A claim for a 31-injection migraine treatment submitted from Healthy Way Medical Center on June 14, 2022, at 9:47 in the morning. Melian's iPhone location data, subpoenaed from her cell carrier, placed her at a beach club in Cabo San Lucas at that exact time. A claim submitted from her clinic on November 28, 2022, at 2:13 in the afternoon. Her Delta boarding pass and TSA screening records placed her at Kahului Airport on Maui. A claim submitted on March 3, 2023, for a patient whose Medicare number matched a man named Andranik G., a 64-year-old federal inmate serving a 19-year sentence at FCI Terminal Island. Andranik G. had not physically left the facility in 5 years. By the summer of 2024, the task force had assembled a spreadsheet of nearly 8,000 individual claim submissions and matched almost every one of them to some form of contradictory evidence. Travel records, patient location data, clinic security logs, or dates when the patient in question was known to be somewhere else entirely. We are heading into the search warrant and the trial now. If you have made it this far, you already know this channel is different. Subscribe if you want to see how the government actually put $24 million in a doctor's account and then had to trace every single dollar of it back out. The next section is where she started making it worse for herself, and it becomes very hard to believe a licensed physician made these choices. The search warrant was executed on the morning of July 9, 2024. Federal agents from the FBI and HHS OIG entered Healthy Way Medical Center at 7:15 a.m. before the clinic opened for the day. They seized the practice's server, 6 laptops, 3 cell phones belonging to Melian, and 2 staff members, the paper patient files stored in a locked cabinet in the back office, and 42 banker's boxes of billing documentation stored in a private storage unit 2 blocks away on West Milford Street. The digital forensics results, delivered to the U.S. Attorney's Office over the following months, were catastrophic for the defense. Melian's own text messages, extracted from her seized iPhone, contained conversations with her office manager that documented the scheme in her own words. Melian, texting from Cabo on June 15, 2022, quote, Bill 47 today, same list. Office manager, quote, same codes as last week? Melian, quote, yes. Just change the dates. Don't do the same patient twice in the same month. Melian, October 4th, 2023. Quote, need to hit 200 this week. Bonus if we clear it. Office manager, quote, some of these people haven't been in for a year. Melian, quote, doesn't matter, just bill it. Melian, February 11th, 2024. Quote, anyone new call this week? I need more Medicare numbers. Office manager. Quote, one walk-in. Mrs. K cosmetic consult. She's 68. Melian. Quote, perfect. Get her number and add her to the list. The banking analysis identified 241 transactions between the clinic's operating account and various personal expenditures that had nothing to do with the practice of medicine. A Tiffany & Company charge of $41,000. A wire transfer of $280,000 to a Cabo San Lucas real estate broker. Monthly charges to a Palm Desert country club. A single Amazon Prime charge for $1,100 that turned out to be a taxidermied peacock. And the antique medieval crossbow. The patient records analysis was the piece that would ultimately move the case from wire fraud into obstruction of justice territory. FBI agents interviewed 117 patients whose Medicare numbers appeared on chronic migraine claims from Healthy Way. Not one of them reported having ever received migraine treatment there. Most had received cosmetic Botox once or twice, at cash prices, for wrinkles. Some had come in for weight loss consultations and never returned. A significant number had never physically entered the clinic at all. Their Medicare numbers had been harvested from a marketing lead list purchased from an outside vendor. Then the grand jury subpoena went out. The subpoena, served on Malian's counsel on September 18, 2024, requested all patient records, consent forms, and treatment documentation related to chronic migraine Botox administration at Healthy Way Medical Center from January 2019 forward. The response deadline was 30 days. What Malian did during those 30 days is what turned the case from a serious wire fraud prosecution into a case with a mandatory obstruction component. She and her office manager, working nights and weekends between September 20th and October 15th, generated more than 4,000 backdated consent forms. They used a template document Malian had built in Microsoft Word years earlier, filled it in with patient names harvested from her billing files, and printed each form onto paper that had been artificially aged by leaving it in direct sunlight on the roof of the clinic for 3 days. She hand-signed roughly 600 of them personally, using different pens to simulate different appointment dates, and instructed her office manager to sign the rest with a forged version of her own signature. She then bundled the forms into patient folders and delivered 19 bankers' boxes of, quote, responsive documents to federal agents at the U.S. Attorney's Office on October 18, 2024. She had been under active surveillance for the previous 6 weeks. FBI agents had watched her carry the boxes from her home to her car. They had photographed her carrying them into the U.S. Attorney's Office, and they had already interviewed one of the temporary paralegals she had hired to help with the, quote, document review. A young woman named Aida Karapetian, who had been given a written script explaining how to describe the, quote, long-standing patient file room if anyone from the government asked her about it. Karapetian had walked into the FBI field office on October 8th and turned over the script. When agents arrived at Malian's La Cañada Flintridge home on the morning of December 12, 2024, with an arrest warrant, she was in her home office wearing a silk robe and pouring coffee. The lead agent later testified about her response to being told she was under arrest. Agent: Dr. Malian, we have a federal warrant for your arrest. Please put the cup down and step away from the desk. Malian: this is a mistake. I gave you people everything you asked for. Agent: ma'am, please step away from the desk and turn around. Malian: I want to speak with my attorney before anything else happens. Agent: that is your right. Turn around, please. Hands behind your back. She turned. She said one more sentence before she went silent for the rest of the day. Malian: you people don't understand what I built. The federal grand jury indictment came down on January 14, 2025. 9 counts of wire fraud, each corresponding to a specific Medicare claim submitted from a specific location on a specific date. 3 counts of obstruction of a criminal health care investigation, tied to the fabricated consent forms and the coaching of the young paralegal. Maximum exposure across the wire fraud counts alone: 180 years. The case was assigned to Judge Fernando Aguilar Rey of the Central District of California and to Assistant United States Attorney Daniela Cortez, a career prosecutor who had spent the previous 11 years in the major fraud section of the office. Malian's defense team, led by a Century City white-collar attorney named Bradford Halston, filed a series of motions attempting to suppress the seized text messages and challenge the government's statistical methodology. Every motion was denied. Trial began on March 3, 2026, at the Edward R. Roybal Federal Building in downtown Los Angeles. It lasted 11 weeks. The government called 47 witnesses. 14 were former patients. 6 were former employees, including 2 medical assistants who described being instructed to collect Medicare numbers from every intake form, regardless of the patient's actual complaint. 2 were FBI data analysts who walked the jury through the entire statistical case, showing them side by side, on a large projector at the front of the courtroom, the calendar dates of her billed procedures and the corresponding dates from her phone's location metadata. The most damaging witness, in the view of most observers who sat through the trial, was Aida Karapetyan, the young paralegal, who spent an afternoon on the stand describing how she had been instructed to lie to federal agents. The defense called 4 witnesses. It rested in a day and a half. The jury deliberated for 11 hours, over 2 days. On the afternoon of May 21, 2026, they returned a verdict of guilty on all 12 counts. The forfeiture proceeding that followed was the largest anyone in the courtroom could remember for a single defendant healthcare fraud case. The jury returned findings on the Tesla Model X, the Cybertruck, all 4 properties, more than $7.3 million sitting in the brokerage accounts, and the $12,000 antique crossbow, which one juror later described to a Los Angeles Times reporter as, quote, "the weirdest exhibit I have ever seen in my life." Sentencing was scheduled for September 10, 2026. At the time of this recording, Melian is being held without bond at the Metropolitan Detention Center in downtown Los Angeles, awaiting that hearing. Federal guidelines calculations submitted by the probation office recommend a sentence in the range of 240 to 300 months. Judge Aguilar Ray, at a preliminary hearing following the verdict, made his views clear about the obstruction conduct in particular. He addressed her directly from the bench. Aguilar Ray: "The wire fraud in this case is enormous, but it is not what troubles me most. What troubles me most is that when the federal government asked you for records, you sat down at a table with your employees, and you manufactured evidence, and you handed that evidence to agents of the United States, and you asked them to believe it. That is not a mistake. That is not desperation. That is a deliberate second crime, committed to conceal the first, and it will be treated as such at sentencing." She stood in silence. Every patient whose Medicare number she had used will be notified by mail. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services has already begun recoupment proceedings against her professional corporation. Her California medical license was suspended by the Medical Board of California on the day of the verdict and will be permanently revoked once her sentence is imposed. The 4 properties, the 2 Teslas, the brokerage accounts, and the medieval crossbow are all in the process of being liquidated by the U.S. Marshals Service, with proceeds returning to the Medicare Trust Fund. She built the largest solo provider Botox fraud in the history of the American Medicare program from a strip mall on North Verdugo Road. And she wrote the whole confession herself, in text messages, on a beach in Cabo, one fake bill at a time. This case was staggering, but the case on the right-hand side is somehow even more brazen. Click it now.